March 21st, 1987 should have been just another night of applause and nostalgia. Dean Martin standing under warm lights before 5,000 people, easing into Everybody Loves Somebody with that familiar, unbothered charm. But halfway through the verse, something invisible tore through the room, a silent signal from the wings that drained the color from his face. And without drama or explanation, he stopped, set the microphone down, and walked away as if the song, the audience, even the stage itself had suddenly ceased to exist. And while the crowd assumed it was part of the act, backstage the carefully protected world of Dean Martin collapsed because his son, Dean Paul Martin, was gone, killed hours earlier in a fighter jet crash, and the next 48 hours would strip away the legend to reveal a father so shattered he would never truly return. Dean Paul, Dino to his father, wasn't just a celebrity son living in reflected light. Born in 1951, he carved his own identity with relentless grace, excelling as a tennis champion, a musician in the pop duo, Dino, Desi and Billy, an actor, and ultimately as a captain in the California Air National Guard, flying F-4 Phantom jets, embodying everything Dean admired: discipline, humility, courage. And though Dean Martin built his career on being untouchable, the man who never let the world see him sweat, that armor dissolved when it came to his boy, because they weren't just father and son, they were best friends, bound by admiration and deep affection that everyone around them quietly understood. That night in Las Vegas, Dean had arrived early, lighter than usual, joking with the crew, almost reborn, unaware that the warmth came from a simple phone call earlier that morning when Dino said, "I love you," and Dean replied, "I'm proud of you." Words exchanged countless times before, never imagining they would become sacred, final echoes. When Eddie Marsh appeared in the wings holding a phone, his face already telling the truth, Dean knew before he knew, and moments later a colonel's voice confirmed what no parent is meant to hear: that his son's aircraft had gone down in the San Bernardino Mountains, and there were no survivors. And Dean didn't cry or scream. He simply froze, as if grief had turned him to stone, whispering later in his dressing room about how Dino loved flying because it made him feel free, clinging to that thought like a lifeline before collapsing into Jean Martin's arms back in Beverly Hills, where the tears finally came, raw and uncontrollable. The following days brought headlines, cameras, and relentless questions, but Dean withdrew into silence, drowning in the details of the crash, the search, the confirmation that nothing was left. And at the military funeral, when the folded American flag was pressed into his hands, the unshakable icon openly wept. Sunglasses no longer enough to hide the devastation, while Frank Sinatra's voice trembled, delivering words meant to comfort a pain beyond language. After that, Dean Martin vanished from public life, canceled shows, ignored calls, and sat alone with old videos and photographs, drinking, watching his son grow up again on screen, confessing to friends that he didn't know how to live in a world where Dino didn't exist. As his health deteriorated, emphysema setting in, weight dropping, spirit fading, until even a brief return to the stage proved impossible because every spotlight reminded him of the son who should have been there. By the time Dean Martin died on Christmas Day in 1995, the official cause was respiratory failure, but everyone who loved him understood the truth, that he had been living on borrowed time ever since the night the music stopped. And when his daughter Deanna said he never recovered, that for 8 years he carried that grief every day, it wasn't poetry, it was fact, because fame cannot soften the loss of a child, and the haunting recording from that night remains not as entertainment, but as evidence, the sound of applause giving way to silence, the precise moment when a legend disappeared and only a broken father remained, realizing too late that there are some losses, no success, no charm, no applause can ever undo. In the years after Dean Martin's death, those closest to him would quietly admit that the man the public mourned in 1995 was not the same man who had walked off that stage in 1987, because something essential had been buried alongside Dean Paul, and what remained was a shadow moving through familiar rooms filled with memories that cut deeper with time instead of healing. As if grief had settled into the walls of his home and followed him from room to room, whispering reminders of a laugh, a voice, a future that never arrived. And even when friends tried to coax him back into the world, to remind him of music and friendship and life, Dean listened politely and smiled faintly, but his eyes betrayed him, always drifting somewhere far away where his son still existed, where the clock had stopped before that phone rang in the wings of a Las Vegas stage. Those who heard him speak in private said he talked about Dino in the present tense, as if doing so might keep him alive, recalling how fearless he was in the cockpit, how gentle he was with his sisters, how proud he had been to wear his uniform. And Dean would shake his head and say that no father should ever outlive his child, that it felt unnatural, like the world itself had made a terrible mistake and refused to correct it. The legend of Dean Martin, the smooth voice, the effortless grin, the man who made joy look easy, slowly faded into history, but the quieter truth endured, that behind every iconic performance was a human being capable of profound love. And it was that love that ultimately undid him. Because love, when it is that deep, leaves no room for survival once it is torn away. Long after the headlines disappeared and the crowds moved on, the story of that night continued to echo, not just as a moment in entertainment history, but as a reminder that even the strongest masks eventually fall, that grief does not announce itself politely or wait for the curtain call, and that sometimes the most devastating tragedies unfold not with noise or spectacle, but in silence, in the simple act of a man placing a microphone down and walking away forever, leaving behind a song unfinished and a life permanently altered, a moment frozen in time where applause gave way to heartbreak, and the world briefly glimpsed the cost of loving someone more than life itself. And in the years after his death, that moment on March 21st, 1987, became more than a footnote in entertainment history. It became a quiet legend passed among those who understood loss, a reminder that behind the tuxedo and the effortless smile was a man who loved one person more than the world ever loved him back. And when Dino was gone, the music lost its meaning, the jokes lost their timing, and the applause became noise he could no longer bear, because every laugh reminded him of a son who would never laugh again, every song of a future that would never arrive. And though fans continued to celebrate Dean Martin as the king of cool, those closest to him knew the truth, that after that night he was only moving through time, not living in it, counting days instead of moments, waiting for rest. And when he finally passed on that Christmas morning, it wasn't an ending, but a reunion. A father finally released from the weight he carried in silence, finally stepping into a place where no microphones interrupted, no phones rang with unbearable news. After that night, time no longer moved forward for Dean Martin. It simply circled the memory of a son who should have outlived him. And every morning he woke to the same realization that Dino was not calling, not flying, not laughing somewhere in the world. And the silence became louder than any applause he had ever known. Friends tried to reach him, but grief had sealed him off. Music, once his refuge, now felt like a betrayal, each lyric reminding him of what joy used to sound like. And though the public still spoke of Dean Martin as an icon, he no longer recognized that man, because the truth was simpler and crueler. He was a father who had outlived his child, and no amount of fame could repair that fracture. So he lived quietly, loving his son in absence, until breath finally left him. And in that final moment, those who knew him believed his last thought was not of stages or songs, but of a young pilot in the sky, forever free. And no songs ended too soon, only the peace of being whole again, with the one person he would have traded everything for, proving that even legends are powerless before love, and love, when broken, leaves echoes that never truly fade. After that night, time no longer moved forward for Dean Martin. It simply circled the memory of a son who should have outlived him. And every morning he woke to the same realization that Dino was not calling, not flying, not laughing somewhere in the world. And the silence became louder than any applause he had ever known. Friends tried to reach him, but grief had sealed him off. Music, once his refuge, now felt like a betrayal, each lyric reminding him of what joy used to sound like. And though the public still spoke of Dean Martin as an icon, he no longer recognized that man, because the truth was simpler and crueler. He was a father who had outlived his child, and no amount of fame could repair that fracture. So he lived quietly, loving his son in absence, until breath finally left him. And in that final moment, those who knew him believed his last thought was not of stages or songs, but of a young pilot in the sky, forever free.